This is EMP Reports, a service of Editor and Publisher magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. Hi again, I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of EMP. And this will be, to use his words, a sobering interview with the great Ken Doctor. Ken Doctor, president of Newsonomics, a famous book that came out 10 years ago that predicted our industry over the next 10 years. And as Ken will say in our interview, was 95+% right. Ken is also working on a project we interviewed him about a few months ago called Lookout, where he's trying to build and incubate a brand new model for local news publishing. He's doing it as we speak, won't tell us the market, but he's, as it has been described, a buffet where you take the best of every single best practice possible in local news publishing and put it together to build the perfect ecosystem for revenue and audience. But today is different. Ken has published a paper predicting the next 5 years thanks to COVID-19. And it is sobering. What's going to happen to print frequency? Will people actually pay for audience content? What's the new newsroom look like? Will we all be working virtually and more? And since he claims he's 95+% right with his predictions, it's definitely worth a listen and a view. So ladies and gentlemen, EMP Reports now interviews the president of Newsonomics, Ken Doctor. Well, Ken Doctor, here we are again on EMP Reports. When you and I did this, 8 weeks ago, we had no idea this was coming.
That's true.
We were discussing then Lookout, correct? And your initiative that is that still, but before we get into COVID-19, What's going on with Lookout? Is that still happening, that initiative?
Proceeding very well.
Mm-hmm.
And we are proceeding toward a launch announcement and also considering what the society may look like on the other end of this immediate crisis. So it would be helpful to have a functioning business environment, a place where people are actually thinking of something other than the virus. So considering just what kind of atmosphere we want to launch into, but otherwise, product is being built, and we will now make announcements fairly soon, I think.
Once again, for those of you that missed the incredible Ken Doctor EMP Reports podcast that we recorded, I think, precisely 8 weeks ago,
Really?
Lookout is an incubation. I remember you called it a buffet, where if you took the best of everything you could be doing as a local news publisher and put it together along with community interaction, and making things happen in the market, and you're actually incubating that in a market. You won't tell us which one.
Not yet.
What?
Not yet.
Not yet, but you promised ENP a semi-exclusive on that once you throw it up on Newsonomics and Neiman and all the other brainy places, right? Then you'll give it to us.
Right.
That
metaphor came from my friend John Davidow from WBUR, who runs content and other stuff for WBUR, the Boston Public Radio station. And I was describing Lookout to him, and he said, well, he knew all the work that I'd done for 15 years as an analyst. And he said, it's like you have taken everything, you've taken the best stuff from the buffet that you have walked past. And I thought it was a wonderful metaphor.
It is. And we're looking forward to hearing more about that. Now let's speak to the great Ken Doctor, who told me just before starting this recording that you have been right 95% of the time, right?
Plus. 95% plus
with your prognostications. And of course, when you look at Newsonomics, the book that was published 10 years ago, it pretty much nailed where we are today. So I have to give you that one. And we already did that. So let's first talk. I read your article in Newsonomics on March 30th. I'll do the straight line. You do the punchline. Are you ready? What's black and white and now deemed essential?
Newspapers.
There you go. Tell us why. There's some positive news from Ken Doctor. What?
So what we have seen is, of course, this irony that we always knew was there, but is ever present now, that people are relying on local newspapers, either in print or digital form or both, much more, because in this kind of terrible pandemic, it's one thing to watch CNN or MSNBC or maybe even Fox and find out what's going on nationally. when you want to know what's happening locally. Your ability to operate, your ability to buy food, to find out if you're going to have medical care, if you get sick or someone in your family, is all a local question. And so we've seen the usage of newspapers and their websites just go off the charts, largely a doubling of usage of newspaper content during the pandemic crisis. And at the same time, though, we have seen a great loss in advertising, 30 to 50% into April of advertising, given that so much is closed down. And so that's the immediate new problem in front of us.
When you published this on March 30th, you talked about how Tampa Bay Times, it was Mark Catches, their editor, was picking up 50 to 70 subscribers every day and bragging on that when you interviewed him. Did you foresee them cutting back on their print publications and just a few days later?
This is now going to happen all over the country. Now, how much these papers cut print days, how quickly they cut print days is going to be one of the phenomena that's going to come out of the COVID crisis. We saw Advance back in 2012 cut pages of print and then print days in New Orleans and then throughout all the Advance papers. There's been a major question now for 8 years. Well, exactly what's been the impact of that? How well have they done with it? They have not released a lot of information. And there's been a lot of skepticism throughout the industry of if you drop too many days of print, then do you break that 7-day habit and just make the industry spiral down faster? So there's been great reluctance to do that. And at the same time, we've seen Mondays dropped here and there. And then importantly, last year, McClatchy dropped Saturdays. Started in the Carolinas. Just in March 21st, they did Miami Herald.
Right.
So all 30 papers in McClatchy are now Saturday digital only and a weekend print. So we will see a lot more of this. Tampa's decision doesn't surprise me, and it's another big test. But there are many big publishers that are looking at the same thing. I was able to report this morning. I wrote another piece for Neiman this morning about the big decisions in front of publishers because of the crisis. In California, for instance, there's a plan underway right now to drop Saturday print at major newspapers in California by January, if not before. So Saturday will go, Monday may well go, and then the question is how many go quickly to, say, the Tampa Bay Times model of Sunday plus Wednesday.
Right. And that being obviously Sunday, so you can maintain whatever insert business we get back on the back end of this, right? And
right.
Wednesday, because it's not a bad day to pick up some of the, you could even turn it into an alternative in a way to pick up that what's happening this weekend business and all that and more.
You got food, you could do weekend, you can do that, just midweek advertising in general. And Mike, you know the metric better than I do. I mean, if you do this right, it takes a lot of preparation, takes a lot of communication in the field and sales, but you can retain 80 to 90% of your print business on 2 days if you do it right in general. Mm-hmm. Question is really on the reader end. And since all newspapers are more dependent on reader revenue subscriptions than they ever were, given the ad turn down, what happens to those long-time subscribers who are used to 7-day print that habit when you break that habit? That's the big fear.
But then again, I did Earl Wilkinson on a similar program. I don't know if you had a chance to dabble with it, but it was about 5 days ago we recorded that. And he said, through crisis comes change. This may be the trigger that allows the reader to understand why the paper did it, accept it because they now need the content more than ever. And this could be that. But we got a lot of hate mail when people were watching that. We still believe in print here. We still believe in print there. So it's an interesting conundrum, but we will see. Now, again, we're now talking to the Ken Doctor who said he's 95+% correct. Correct. And we're now going through your prognostications for 2025. In other words, what you are publishing, and I have the advanced copy here, which by the time we broadcast this, you're going to have it up at Neiman. And
it's up today already, yeah.
All right, so you wanted to do that before I interviewed you. On your prognostications for what the backside's going to look out excuse me, there I was, look out, but look like at the end of this, and then you're going to project it into 5 years. So number one, 2 day a week for the 7 day a weekers. That's the first thing you're talking about, correct?
Well, not week 2 in some cases. In other cases, it'll be 3 or 4. Some cases, they'll just drop Saturday. But in general, dropping days of print.
Okay. The next thing, you were, again, not faring well to the alternative weekly industry in some of the notes I saw, where we interviewed John Heaston on a podcast, president of the AAN, Association of Alternative News Weeklies. And John kept saying, but we're the in-depth source. I mean, they just do quick headlines. We dig deep. People need our content. And he was very, very Pollyanna and positive about their future. Just go ahead and say it. 95%. Will the alternative weekly fare well on the backside of this?
Most of them not, unfortunately.
Because of
I have deep experience there. When I was 25 years old, I was the editor and publisher of an alternative weekly in Eugene, Oregon. So I know that business. I still follow that business to some degree. I've spoken at AND conferences. Incredibly dedicated people with a very interesting business model. And of course, it's the exact wrong business model for this point in COVID spring. It's all about people being out in the city and enjoying the city. So my sources have told me that 80% or so of their advertising is just gone right now. Now, if it's gone for a week or 2, as we know, that's one thing, but it looks like this is going to last most of the second quarter. And the big problem for alternative weeklies is what we have talked about for years. They are totally exposed to advertising as a primary revenue source.
Right.
They expanded to events to some degree, but really events are another form of advertising because it's sponsorship money.
Well, membership now is where some of them are pouncing on membership.
But the amount of membership money they have is very, very small.
Right.
It's just starting out. They were late to move into membership money or subscription money. And so it's a small part of their budget. So they're exposed to the wrong part of the market. And lastly, these have been, as have been all print news operations, been weakening for years. I was told before the crisis that there were no more than a dozen of these that were profitable in any significant way. So their weaknesses as businesses, of course, left them so vulnerable to this kind of crisis.
What about the brand itself? I mean, I think these brands have, that's just me. I love brands. I picked up EMP, 140-year-old brand, constantly polishing it up. But no one jumped on Village Voice, right? It just still laying there with, the old archives. The one in Buffalo went down, right? I forgot the name of it. That is now shut down. And that was an amazing publication as well. So you don't see anyone picking these up and going digital only, right? You just think it's just these will be brands that just peter off.
Think of the metaphor, and one of the things that still hasn't been done in this now, 25 years of digital revolution is what does an alternative weekly do? The main thing is it connects you with your city. It tells you what to do, the cool things that are out there, music, restaurants, festivals, all that kind of stuff. Still, 2020, we used to have digital cities. We had Sidewalk. We had all of these efforts to create a digital city guide that would be easy to use, an app that would take proper use of databases. It's not there. And the alternative weeklies have not developed it well. They have some rudimentary products. So the kind of products to use digital in the way that digital should be used, because people still want that information, they didn't do or they haven't done in time. And then what happens individually to these companies and to an industry is you run out of time. And that's my essential thesis in what I wrote today, is that unfortunately, as we've been talking about transition, we're now zooming ahead to 2025. That the time that publishers hoped they had to further transition may have vanished in the stretch of the COVID spring. And so a lot of decisions are upon them that will reflect on the life or death of their businesses.
Same thing for the free papers, the buy-sell publications that are out there. They were tight margin publications, very print related, meaning lots of bottom line expense. Do you see some of them just going straight digital, or those brands don't mean as much in a Craigslist net
the
next door world?
Hard transition to make for those same product reasons and for capital reasons. It takes time to make these transitions. And it's the same two things, Mike. It's about life and about business. It's time and money.
Right.
And if you don't have enough money and you have less time and you're not sure about exactly what to do, that's a bad combination. And unfortunately, so much of the media industry finds itself in that condition today.
All right, so 2 prognostications for 2025. 7-day-a-weekers will not be 7-day-a-weekers, but it'll be varied to 2, 3, 4, depending upon the flavor, the market, what have you. Right. You don't see a bright future for the alts and the free papers that rely on free distribution, and they didn't embrace digital quick enough. Okay, so what about paid subscription? What about reader revenue? Will a millennial pay for local content? Ken, what do you say?
They're absolutely paying for it. The question is whether they'll pay for it in sufficient numbers to help these companies that still have huge legacy costs as they transition. So we're seeing good numbers. We all know the national numbers, the Times numbers, and the Journal and the Post. Guardian is impressive. But we also have the Seattle Times and the Boston Globe and the Star Tribune and the LA Times. You're seeing tens of thousands of digital subscribers. So it is working. There is a formula. It's a hard formula to implement because it takes money and it takes time. You have to have the capacity to have enough content and then a good enough digital products and then a business intelligence service behind it that knows how to target readers and to bring them along that subscription path. So all those things, which are no longer secrets, they were developed by the FT starting in 2009 and then adapted by the New York Times and others. These are the same kind of things the major metros who are having success are doing, but others who haven't done it and are farther behind the curve are finding it harder to do. And at the same time, of course, they're now cutting staff because of the new ad crisis.
Will there be newsrooms with everybody collaborating and the guy walking down, let's go back to some of the movies with patches on my elbow, leaning over the desk saying, I need that deadline now? Or will we be working a virtual company like I do? My editorial team's in California. They don't even like it when I fly out there to visit them. We're operating fine. I mean, can a publisher be away from his editorial team? Can an editor edit virtually? Is that 2025 or will it be a mixture? Ken, take it away.
It's far sooner than 2025. It was interesting. I talked to a number of people. I did a lot of reporting in the last week. Probably talked to more than 30 people in the industry. And interestingly, both Frank Blethen, who owns and runs the Seattle Times, and Mike Klingensmith, who's publisher at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, made the same point. And they said, wow, we're about 100% virtual. Anybody that's in the press room and in the physical part of the business, they have to be there. We're taking all the precautions we can, but essentially the rest of the business is virtual. And they know they have good enterprises, they have good staffs, but they were amazed at how it could be done and how flawlessly it could be done, and that communication works. And both of them made the point that when they get on the other side of it, that question of working with and talking with their staffs about what do you learn from this, and do we actually increase productivity by not forcing people to go into a central office every day, is going to be a topic. So it's one of those things I think that comes out of this crisis. People who have worked more in the digital only world are not surprised by this. There are so many virtual companies that operate very well. But it's a major mindset change away really from a manufacturing mindset.
Exactly.
Manufacturing mindset says, come here, make these widgets for 8 hours. We'll watch you. We want to know what your productivity is. And then you go home. And the digital mindset is there's a set of work to be done. I'm going to do that set of work. And let me know if it's good enough or not good enough. And we'll either continue working or not. But don't expect me to punch a time card. And so we're moving beyond that physical manufacturing atmosphere that newspapers were in for so long to what really is a digital atmosphere.
All right. So there was always a need for some reason to have a physical building in the downtown that everybody could look at and say, there's the newspaper. And in that building was a publisher.
Yeah.
And the publisher was the face of the newspaper for hundreds of years, always on the school board or the YMCA or the library or the chamber, what have you.
Right.
Without the physical building, will there still be a face, a local publisher, or will there not in 2025? What is your prediction, Ken?
So it's interesting that metaphor, and I think you're right about the metaphor. And a number of us are romantic about it because it's true that having that building downtown, and when I worked in St. Paul, for instance, I worked there for 9 years, there were actually 3 buildings that had housed the Pioneer Press over time. And everybody knew each building, not just the current one, but each building. And so it's true, those buildings were a symbol of the city because the newspaper, especially as surviving dailies after World War II, when you got down to 1 per city, they were a symbol of it. Even if people said, oh, I don't like what those guys are doing, but that's our newspaper. So it was a symbol of the city. Your point about publishers is a really interesting one. And it's not about, I think, the publisher being in that building exactly to what you said. It's the publisher being out in the community. So the publisher has to have a community role, community organizations, boards, but also importantly with advertisers, right? That has to be the business head, and it isn't just a sales call, it's a relationship over time. And interestingly, what's happened as we've seen all the cuts in newspapers and consolidation in newspapers is most of these companies, most of the chains, which dominate most of the press now, have regional publishers.
Right.
So a publisher is in charge of 4 or 5 cities, over 100 miles or 200 miles or 300 miles. That's very different. That, I think, is much more of a loss than a building, although I too am nostalgic about the buildings. It's really having a publisher and having people out there who represent that paper in the business community and with advertisers. And I think in a lot of ways, for reasons that are understandable in terms of cost cutting, newspaper companies have slit their own throats in these communities because they're no longer involved. And you hear from people in these communities, I don't talk to reporters anymore. I don't see a publisher out there. So that's all about, I think, a huge thing, and it's important to look out as I build Lookout. It's community connection, that you have to have a community connection. And that really isn't dependent on print or dependent on digital. It's about people. And it's about having people in the community, both reporters and business side people and publishers, who people know. That's what works in local, and it will work again after this crisis is over.
But a publisher cannot be exclusively from an editorial side with no knowledge of how to deal with the business side. The publisher has to be holistic and be willing to sit down with a key advertiser as well as read that paper every day and push its vision towards whatever message it wants to give the community, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And that's the way, before we hit the crisis point of essentially a Great Recession, that's the kind of publishers who are very successful. Some of them came out of the newsroom, but they understood that community role and they understood the advertising role. And they also understood that you could talk to anybody, but that didn't mean they had any sway with the newsroom. When I was managing editor in St. Paul, very clear demarcation what a night reader newsroom would listen to and what it wouldn't listen to. But as managing editor, I got to meet every year with the car dealers at one luncheon and the home builders at another luncheon. They were never happy, but you listen, and then they know they've been listened to, and the whole thing works. They are not allowed to exert pressure. They're listened to. That worked for a very long time. One of the things that I fear and I see what's happening is in the great stress of financial stress at this point for years now, that there's more bending toward advertising will, or really an unwillingness to do tough stories that might negatively impact advertisers because it seems like a survival issue for those newsrooms.
The separation of church and state gets grayer and grayer and grayer, is what you're saying. And when that happens...
Well, it really isn't gray, but it's considered gray, and you can build all kinds of constructs around it, but it's really fear. It's really raw fear of losing more advertising, which would result in more loss of newsrooms. But it's very clear. Newsrooms do what they do. They should do it with great accuracy and fairness, but they do what they do. And the old expression that survives into 2020, without fear or favor.
All right, 2025, the newsroom. I assume I've got a full-time with benefits editor, or a couple editors, depending upon the size of the market. Do I have full-time with benefits shooters and reporters, or is everybody a stringer right now? And is everybody just figuring out their own health plans and their own financials and billing me as an outside corporation? What's going on with the cost of employees at the 2025 newsroom?
Well, costs are always going to be an issue, but you cannot run a news organization, even if you run it virtually, on the basis of stringers.
Okay.
What is really important, and clearly we see this in the power of the national brands the last several years, but I think it's equally true locally, is a news company says, this reporter, this columnist, but it is the collection of these people all adhering to a single standard of serving this community and serving it well and accurately. So it's a trustworthy institution. Now, that institution needs to have a solid core. It needs to have full-time people to what we're talking about in terms of having a publisher that's out in the community, whether this person's called a publisher or not, but people out in the business community, people out reporting, and the sense that there's a company there that is both listening and powerful. And I think that's another one of the things that we've been losing, and we need to rebuild this sense of strength more than weakness. People don't like, and they don't buy into weakness. The idea of going to readers and saying, please save us, is not going to do as well as we're here to serve you. Look at what we're doing. We're trying to do more and asking for your money than we're doing less, and please save us. So institutions, and I think for me, 2025, if we're successful, we have both revivified local news institutions, could be legacy ones that have found a way forward, probably with new owners at this point, and perhaps startup models that actually succeed and grow, not just are being stable.
Right. So let's not talk about the pure plays that may come in and take over. Let's stay with the legacy news organizations.
Yeah.
What are the margins? 2025. I'm the owner. Okay, let's assume that we're not discussing the big groups now. We're discussing a community paper. Am I comfortable with what, 12, 15, 8?
Yeah, it's 5 to 15.
5 to 15 is the margin.
15 depends on the community, depends on the mission and the capacity, but 5 to 15.
All right, what about the multiple if I want to sell that puppy someday in a good economy?
Well, multiple's going to be hard to guess. I mean, but the multiple's going to be, it's really a question of, do we find so 2025 would be 16 years after the Great Recession.
Right.
So the multiples back to 2004, 5, and 6, Night River being sold and Pulitzer and the others, they were like 10 to 12.
Right.
And now we're down to like 3.5 to 4.5, roughly.
Right.
And what is a multiple? A multiple says, how stable is this business? Does anybody have any confidence in how long this business is going to last? Well, you're saying basically, I think this cash flow is going to last 3 years or 3.5 years. That's what I'll do, as opposed to 10. So
right.
This is nice and steady, right? So if it may be less a question of if than at what scale. At some point, there are going to be stable local news companies. We'll see who owns them. We'll see how big they are. But once they're stable and being able to throw off predictable cash flow, the multiple will go up.
Right.
But we're not inside of that yet.
Okay. So I think we've just put together the model of the legacy media company that will be on the backside of this for 2025. I can't get you to end this until we talk about other media, public radio. They're finding an audience through this, aren't they? Everywhere I'm reading now, the public radio stations that have good news operations that are doing the storytelling are building their audiences now. Are they going to come out of this stronger? Are they going to be in a better position in 2025?
I think they will be strong. The question is how strong and how many of the public radio stations. So I've covered public radio news to some extent. I want to cover it more, but I've limited time on it. If you look at the top 20, 25 markets, it's fairly remarkable and a story that isn't told very well of how much many of these have increased their news staffs. You have stations like in California, KQED in the Bay Area, and KPCC in LA. And
Detroit has a very strong news staff as
Detroit
well.
has a strong one, WBUR, WBEZ is growing, OPB and Colorado Public Radio, so Oregon and Colorado. So there are a lot of these that have really invested in news. And they have built an audience. And they've also seen, importantly, that the more news they do, the better they do with membership, which is absolutely key. So what's the business model of public radio? And it turns out it's very similar to newspapers. It's
Totally.
Advertising revenue, and it's listener or reader revenue. Now, in this current crisis right now with COVID, they're really having problems with underwriting, and it's down 15, 20, maybe even 25%. If it's short term, and it could be short term, but we don't know at this point, that is definitely survivable. Interestingly, their membership isn't going up as much as we're seeing the spurt at newspapers with subscriptions, but it's steady. So they've been able to build, and public radio has built membership over 40 years. And so that there's a real strength to it. Big question 2025 for public radio is how much both the stations that are already invested in news invest more, and how many of the other, say, top 50 stations get into it. Because in all those markets, the local news operations of newspapers are declining, so there is an opportunity there. And public radio has its own challenges. There's problems of organization, of governance, who runs the station, are they ambitious? And there's one really key one, which is elusive, which is writing for print is different than writing for radio.
Definitely.
And they're still figuring that out. It's legacy. It's a different kind of legacy, and they're still figuring it out. But really good people. And importantly, what public radio does is the closest to the mission, the long-standing mission of newspapers, which is to serve the public's news and information needs locally, and not be affected by advertising and doing favors for people.
Left television for last. On the backside of this, and we don't know what the backside is, but most of the pundits are thinking we may be seeing airplane land. Earl Wilkinson he was a little at INMA was a little bit more. He said the plane will be landing May 1st, but that just means the curve.
Yeah, but nobody will be on it.
Okay, I'm going to make sure Earl hears that. All right, here's the thing. There will be political money coming this year. I don't think it's going to shut down completely now. We're still in that mindset where you have to buy tons of ads for a political, and that's what television is making a whole mess of money on, right? I mean, so what happens in 2025? Where is local TV? Where are their revenues, and what is their future?
Oh, I have covered it less, but the experts I talk to in it say the big question, if you said 2025 now, is where are retransmission speeds? So the two big sources of income are advertising and retrans fees.
Right.
And retrans fees are fairly well contracted, as I understand it, and stable through 2024. What is the world of access to video in 2025? And so as that gets figured out, and it's going to be, we would think, maybe far different than 2020, how much retrans revenue stays. And you can look at retrans revenue as a point of stability that TV has that newspapers don't. But if that starts to erode, they're going to face the same problems that newspapers have. Now, interestingly, with local TV, because of the retrans fees, because advertising has been more stable, and because every other year they get this big boost of election money. And this year, Michael Bloomberg is the best thing that ever happened to him.
Oh, yeah.
But every other year, it's really good. The question now for them is going to be how much of their viewership is going digital. They have dabbled in all kinds of little digital innovation, but still less than 10% of the revenue of local TV stations is digital. They haven't needed to invest in it, but if other parts of their revenue streams begin going south, we're going to see more investment in it, but then they'll be competing with Google and Facebook just the way local newspapers have, and that will be problematic.
Well, the only content they own locally is news, correct? When everything else is streaming around and people can pick up the network shows for a few dollars a month.
That's right.
Why hasn't there been, I mean, we have a Republican Senate, we have a Republican, why hasn't there been cross ownership? It's been relaxed. Why hasn't a TV station,
it's really interesting, isn't it?
I paired up with the newspaper and tried to conquer the news of a major market and said, we'll own it for the next 20 years. I just don't, and that's just my question to the universe, maybe to you.
No, I think it's a really interesting question. And I've asked those people the same question. And it's what you're right, because it's one of those things you say, like, this just makes sense. Operationally, you're in a kind of similar business. It's a news business, it's an information business, and you're selling advertising. Can't we pull this together in ways that have been tried in Tampa for a long time ago, Phoenix and different places? As far as I can determine, there's a couple of reasons. One is just cultural. People, and they're TV people and there's newspaper people, and they don't
today
know each other, right? They don't really feel comfortable with each other's environments, and they don't feel comfortable with each other's businesses. And then the other thing is, which is always a funny thing to hear for anybody starting something new, or in this case saying, hey, can't we put this together in a new way that hasn't been done before? They go like, I haven't seen it done before successfully. Why do you think you can do it? So without a model that says, oh, here's how you have an investment thesis of you put together even in a single market, TV and newspaper into a single operation. And we saw efforts in Dayton. Dayton's been trying that for different ways for a while, until we can say, it worked here, and here's how they figured out who's running it and which side of the house is running it, and importantly, what are the skills of the people you hire, both in the content side and the sales side. It could be 2030. It's one of those things, Mike, that I thought, and you thought, I think, would happen well before 2020.
Sure.
But it's not happening.
Actually, if anything, when I was in TV, people were trying it and being shut down by the government. Now you can do it. And it's just the opposite. It must be cultural. All right. So look, we're near the end of our journey. What have I missed? 2025. Is there any other prognostication from the great Ken Doctor, one more time, who's 95% right in his prognostications?
Right.
Anything I've missed? You want to paint a picture for our...
I think the biggest questions go beyond the industry, and they really go to the society. As I was writing my piece today, I was writing about how we are so internally focused in the media industry, and probably every business, every industry is. We think about our problems, and especially the problems right now. Yet, if you take that stretch of time between 2020 and 2025, there may be major changes in society. We don't know when we're at tipping points. But if you look at this crisis with COVID, and you look at these questions of universal childcare, of loan debt, student loan debt, universal health care, all these questions about can I pay for a test, or who's going to pay for my COVID test? And if I have it, who's going to pay for hospitalization? So you have all of the issues that we've been talking about in healthcare, family leave, childcare, sick leave, income equity, right? And all of these issues that have been on the fringes may come to the fore. And it seems to me that the local media companies, it's also somewhat true of the national companies, but especially local, yes, they need to adequately cover the news and the issues of their times, which may be changing, and they need the people who can do that. They also are going to need to provide leadership. And the leadership doesn't mean saying to their communities, here's what we're going to do, here's the solutions. But it means take a leading role, just like the publishers we talked about, in saying, in these communities, we can confront these issues. In these states, we can confront these issues, and we can come up with solutions. So I think we got to take a wider lens here and look at the changing society. We talk about diversity. The news forces are no more diverse than they were 10 years ago. We talk about all these issues of family and income. They have got to be tackled, and they've got to be tackled intelligently by the journalists of the 2020s. So it's not just business model and change in advertising. It's the basic journalism itself and how it gets done. Who gets hired to do it? What kind of skills do they have? What kind of life experience they have? So it is quite a challenge. And lastly, we need people who are willing to take on that challenge. But it's a new era.
When you say to embed them into the community to affect change, again, that brings us back to Lookout, correct? Where one of the things you said when we discussed it is it's more than a newspaper, it's part of the community. It forms those committees. It helps create, how should I put this? I don't want to put words in your mouth. You show the problem and then you show the cure. Am I saying that?
Yeah, and the way I've taken us to summing that up is we do two things really, really well. High quality news and information pretty much stands on its own. We know what that means, but it's got to be executed. And then we stand for community betterment. So we say this community can solve its own problems. We believe having high quality news and information will help. We believe bringing in best practices from other places, so it's not just a myopic view of what's in front of us, is important. And we're not going to say, here's the solution to affordable housing or homelessness or traffic, but we're going to say, we can solve these problems, do community forums, do the reporting, push the community to solve its own problems. And I think that is going to be an important part of it. And with the way it all ties together, the business model, we'll see if this goes in the 95%.
I have to ask.
After we launch, is that if we do that well and we do that authentically, we're part of the community. The community supports it both because it's a good product, but also they see that actually it is making a better community.
Excellent. I would now like to ask you what stocks to buy since you're 95% right, or at least plus.
I don't know my record on that.
All right, there you go. Ken Doctor, thank you. It's always a pleasure, especially because you really do have a good way of, I don't want to say shock, but honestly put the truth, at least put the opinion out there, your truth, because some people are going to disagree with this, right? I mean.
Well, what I try to do, it's interesting. I was reading Twitter this morning in reaction to what I wrote today, and one word that came out that often comes out in response to my work is sobering. So yes. I think I've sobered, I could work for AA. I think I've sobered up a lot of people. But what I try to do, and it is a kind of unique style in the business, is it's reported. It's based on my reporting and trying to understand. And I talk to CEOs, I talk to people who don't like some of my analysis, but they know I'm really trying to figure out what's going on. It's fact-based. And then I try to draw the conclusions. And I wish they were rosier and more optimistic, because I'm an optimistic person. But what we all need in journalism and in the world is the accuracy and the truths as we can find them as reporters. In that sense, I just try to be a reporter to the industry. I
will leave with this sobering quote from your article of March 30th. As one of the most successful, optimistic, and progressive of today's publishers told me, quote, if it's a couple of months, we'll make it through. If it's 6 months, all bets are off. All bets are off. Ken Doctor, thank you for joining us in EMP Reports. I have a feeling we'll be getting together in a couple more weeks to see where things are going. More importantly, we appreciate your valuable time.
Good luck to us all.
Stay well, sir.
Thank you.